I work on PowerShell and DSC specifically, and also Nano Server specifically on bringing all the commandlets we know and love from full PowerShell into the CoreCLR Nano Server. So today I'll be talking a little bit about Nano Server en masse, how we got here, where we're at, and what the path is forward, and then a little bit about remote management, how PowerShell integrates with Nano Server, and what we hope that you guys will do between now and the next time we see you with Nano Server and kind of spreading the word on manageability in Nano Server. So I'll talk a little bit about what we're hearing from customers, the journey we've gone through, like I mentioned. We'll focus on 3 areas within Nano Server manageability, looking at PowerShell Core briefly, and RSMT, the remote server management tools. Take a look at some graphs and results we've seen, benefits of Nano Server, and then focus on Nano Server in 2016 with containers, and then next steps from there. And just a quick show of hands, how many people have had a chance to play around with Nano Server so far? Great. And how many people actively use Nano Server day to day? Okay. And anyone try to deploy a production workload to see if it works or not on Nano? All right. Good. So this is the perfect audience for this talk. Hopefully I can convert some of you to at least giving it a shot. So 3 big drivers from our customers that have kind of led us to thinking this is why we need to define Nano Server. And it goes along the same tenets that brought us from Server Core to where we are now. First of all, reboots impact business. We know that the people we work with often come back and say to us, rebooting is a costly effort. Whether we're managing the systems, we're doing it for a client, or we're just experimenting, uptime is really critical. So if you're patching a component you never use, it's kind of a waste of a reboot cycle. And when the reboot happens, you want to get back into work and get back to your workload ASAP, not fiddle around with having post-restart configuration. Another big issue is server images are too big. Windows Server 2K12R2 started to bloat up a little bit towards the end there, and we saw that with the Server Core option, people had a slightly more lightweight option. With Nano, the goal is to have the minimal image, just the components you want, so that when you're transferring the images or deploying them, you can do it as quickly as possible. When you're storing images, you can have per role images customized to exactly what you want and nothing more. And third, the infrastructure requiring too many resources. So this is where we're talking about an OS taking up all these resources for sentient processes that are running in the background and really not giving you anything. A good example of this one we've had feedback a lot about in early Windows Server 2016 TP builds are things like the map service or the Xbox service. I don't want that stuff running. And while we can address some of that stuff, Nano Server really is the solution to having just what you want running. Also, by having a lower footprint, we can have higher VM density. So where on a piece of metal you can maybe run 2 or 3 server VMs, now you're talking about 10, 20 Nano Server VMs. So this brings us to kind of our first tenet here, which is I want just the components I need and nothing more. And to show you that, we'll kind of step through a quick journey of how we got to where we are. So historically, Windows Server had this big footprint, and you'd add on roles and features leading up to the Server 2K3 timeframe. With Server 2008 and 2008 R2, we took a little bit of a different methodology where we provided Server Core as a GUI-less option and full server that gave you all of the compatibility with previous server infrastructure. With 2012 R2, we've kind of split up the GUI part and provided a minimal server interface, and then on top of that, you load in the GUI shell. And as we move towards 2016 TP5, some of you that have experimented with TP4 may notice that we call this a desktop experience and just server now. The default option for server is now going to be this desktop experience where a lot more of the Windows 10 client shell that you see will be looped back into the server product. So the cloud journey now, these 2 big parts here. First of all, Azure. We want to minimize reboots here because for Azure tenants, having these things constantly reboot is just interrupting services. They have specific workloads they've usually destined towards some Azure resource group. which can be really costly, even more so than on the on-prem solution that we previously talked about. And also the provisioning of large host images has this big impact on network resources, where a lot of network architects have to sit around saying, how many VMs are going to get deployed on this architecture every day, every week, because I need to allocate my network resources such that it can handle that throughput. And a lot of times that's the most bandwidth intensive action, is deploying and spinning up VM resources. The more recent step we've taken is with the cloud platform system. And so Azure Stack, Azure Pack, the whole point here is that we are bringing in a cloud in a box running everything you need to get off the ground. But still, there is some setup time involved. There's still some patches and reboots that cause interruptions to the entire thing. And like you see here, I mean, the reboot times are still, they're acceptable. They're a lot better than they have been historically, but we can get them better. And that's really the primary driver behind Nano, is that we can do better. We have to let go of some of the past to be able to do that. So the next statement, we need server configuration optimized for the cloud. How do we do that? So Nano, headless, 64-bit only, and it's a deployment option of Windows Server. We've refactored it from the ground up. We're focusing on this cloud OS infrastructure and born in the cloud applications. Roles, servers that currently exist that are in use every day, we want to make those be first-party workloads on Nano Server. And so this is what the new picture looks like. So with roles and features, we kind of went along the zero footprint model. And even inside the company, when teams are trying to bring components to Nano, they're saying, well, why don't I just bring everything I got? And we tell them to take this opportunity and look at what they have and see whether or not it makes sense to bring it to a headless Nano Server world, and whether it is adequately manageable using PowerShell, some of the other manageability tools we'll talk about. So all of the roles, and going into TP5, this will change slightly, will live outside of Nano Server. So we're talking standalone packages that you can pull down and install. Sound familiar to another operating system maybe? With that being said, the goal is to be able to pull these packages similar to how you add Windows features to Windows 10 right now. On demand, the way you want them, when you want them, and to have a small amount of time between when you say install and when that role is running. So the initial pool of roles is there. So Hyper-V, storage, clustering, DNS and IIS have rolled out recently in the latest builds. You're going to see bigger, more improvements in the next release of Nano Server for those two. And of course, CoreCLR, .NET Core, and we're really focusing on trying to bring driver support to Nano Server. So all of the drivers that are needed for networking storage, one by one, we're making sure that they're compatible and that there's a reasonable story to get those injected into your Nano image. Anti-malware, so Windows Defender is an optional package. We're working with the Windows Defender team closely to make sure that signatures are updated via Windows Update. So you'll have a fully anti-malware, fully maintained anti-malware option on Nano Server still. It's not the Wild West. And then SC and Insight agents are underway, and we hope to roll those out alongside the next release. So PowerShell Core, so how many of you, I'm not going to ask how many of you have worked with PowerShell, how many of you have worked with PowerShell Core? Okay, and for those of you that had your hands up, keep them up. How many are on IoT? All right, okay. So a few people. So the whole point of Core is to refactor everything to run on CoreCLR. That means that you'll have one common core between IoT and Nano and anything else we decide to do with .NET Core. Full PowerShell language compatibility is there, remoting is there. So all those things that you expect for command invocation, PS sessions, all work. Core engine components are starting to get more greenlit. Things like DSC are starting to show up in their fully fledged functionality. Support for all commandlet types. I heard some people in the room chattering about C# and scripts and sim, so all that stuff works. And the intent here as we work within the company to bring commandlets over is to make sure that people are bringing them over in the most future-proof way possible. So if there's some rewriting of underlying code, we're not just picking up commandlets from full and bringing it over. And we recommend when you do that, when you're working on your code too, don't just bring it over blindly. Take a look at what benefits Core will give you and whether or not your functionality makes sense. And so limited set of commandlets initially, but we're adding commandlets every day internally, and those are reflected in technical preview builds that you guys see. And as I'm sure some of you have seen on client with Windows 10, the Insider program, if you're on the fast ring, you're getting updates to PowerShell whenever a new build drops. So we're hoping to have that same mechanism with Nano. So RSMT is one of the management options that I mentioned. So how many people have taken a look at RSMT? Show of hands. All right. How many people know what RSMT is, have heard of it? Okay, so many more people. Great. So RSMT is a web-based portal to manage, and it kind of includes replacements for all of those local-only tools that you've either had to RDP in or set up a remote session to. So Task Manager, the Event Viewer, Device Manager, Control Panel, even PowerShell, Disk Management, File Explorer, all that stuff is there. And the team is continuing to greenlight more and more functionality. So with that, I have a little video put together here that I'll walk us through of RSMT. All right, so this video is publicly available, but and there's a link to it at the end, but I just kind of want to walk you guys through this. So RSMT, as you can see in the nice Ibiza portal that we've grown accustomed to on Azure, takes the server properties, and then what you'll see here is a blade that shows you all the details about that server. So you have the typical resource plan and IP info, you have blades for, or you have all the performance info listed, and all the tools. So here we'll step through kind of one by one to show you guys what you can see via RSMT. So OS info, computer ID info, so computer name, whether it's part of a work group or domain. You can change those settings there as well without having to remote into the box or use any sort of remoting. You can work with users by adding users there. Network information is there. Adapter info. And then so if you look at each of these individual performance buckets, you're actually getting a lot more functionality than anywhere else we've been able to provide this stuff remotely. So CPU info, network load info, memory utility, usage, and disk metrics. Disk metrics are turned off by default for performance, but you can enable those and start getting disk metrics pulled in. And there you go, so that's pulling off of the VM there. And then for the tools, so these are some of the tools I mentioned. You can look at processes. You can search for processes, create process dumps and processes via this web UI. You can also run new processes. So you hit that run process button, type in the process you want to run, hit OK. I'll show back up there. You can add some more detail that isn't there by default by using the column selector, similar to how you would in Task Manager. And similarly with services, you have the ability to start, stop, pause services. You can search for services. Really cool way to edit the registry, so no more having to remote in or start a remote registry session. You can go through here, search for whatever you need to change, whatever you need to add. Gives you a nice UI to do that stuff in. Adding rules and features is coming. For now, this just displays what's currently enabled. And then remote PowerShell. So from a browser, on whatever device you choose, you can remote PowerShell into whatever box, in this case, this VM that we've got set up here. And everything that you would expect about discovery will also work. And you can see that it's following that same Ibiza blade concept. Like the team has worked really hard to make this UI be as discoverable as possible. Device manager functionality works great. You can see devices. This is really good for debugging environments or somewhere where you're trying to troubleshoot what's going on with the system. Same principles that apply to maintaining systems in the cloud kind of apply in the hybrid environment now. And lastly, event viewer. So you can navigate through the event logs. You can manipulate the query.
You mentioned File Explorer. Will that be available soon?
Yeah. So for the time being, since we're all PowerShell folks, you can do that stuff from the PowerShell prompt.
Sure.
But there's 2 or 3 more tiles that are going to show up in the very near future.
Is there anything that I can't do in PowerShell that this UI will allow me to do? Like when you enable disk metrics, can I turn that on via PowerShell?
No, that has to be done through the UI, because what it's actually doing is reaching out to the agent on that server.
Firewall ports does this use? Is this the standard PowerShell reporting NRM, or is it?
So it's actually using an agent that you install that configures that stuff for you, and then you have the ability to customize however you want it to connect, what port you want it to
You can
connect.
lock it down?
Yeah, you can definitely lock it down.
Can you interact with that agent via PowerShell?
Sorry?
Can you repeat questions?
Can I repeat questions? Sure, absolutely.
Are you able to interact with that agent that you install via PowerShell?
The question is, are you able to interact with the agent via PowerShell? So no, there isn't much interactivity for that agent. It's a base.
Is that planned? Or?
Yes, it is planned. Yeah. And when I say something is planned, I will caveat that with saying it's coming in an upcoming release of Nano Server, right?
Is there an API exposed for it?
Not currently. Yeah.
Will this be available for core as well, or just Nano?
Will this be available for Server Core?
Yes, sir.
It'll be available for all flavors of Windows Server. Yeah.
This looks like it's running in Azure, so is this interface available for on-prem Nano or just Azure, Nano and Azure?
So you can actually connect it to whatever you want in your hybrid environment locally, but it does run in Azure. So you'd go into Azure, connect your computer to it, and then you could connect to it even if it's a local machine. If it's off the internet right now, there is no way, but there is plans to try and get this gateway service to run locally.
How do you connect it to an on-prem VM?
With IP address. You can just define, the same way we define that computer in the network it was in, you can just define over the internet.
What ports is it using?
Sorry?
What ports is it using?
So I believe the RSMT team uses the default WinRM ports in addition to a couple of other. I can get those details for you after.
So is this available only if you have Azure?
It is only available with an Azure account right now. Yep.
Will the IOT web-based management interface follow this at some point?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Will the IOT, the IoT management interface, will that follow along with this, or are the two going to diverge?
Yeah, the question is whether the IoT management interface will look like this. I can't answer that question because I'm not part of the IoT team, but I can definitely get those details for you if you want to sync up with me after the session. Okay. Yes.
Are there plans to manage any down-rev operating systems?
I can definitely reach out to the RSMT team for you and get you the latest details on that if you want to sync up with me after.
Sure.
Okay. Any other questions about RSMT? Yeah.
I don't know if it's on the same lines, but do you see, is this for server manager going with as this becoming a replacement for it longer term?
The question is, does this replace Server Manager? This is currently an addition to the management portfolio, right? To answer your question, Server Manager is still there in the most recent server installs. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Plans to use just like an RBAC for the different tool settings?
Sorry, one more time.
Is there an RBAC, like is there a role-based access control for the different tools that will be available?
You're talking about as to what you see here, like can you gray out certain functionality for a certain user?
Correct.
There are plans to put segregated controls over certain functionality into the RSMT portal, but I can't speak to when those will be in. Again, if you want to sync with me after, I can definitely give you more details. Yes?
What sort of access control does it have? Could I, for example, have my own servers and my own group and give somebody outside of my organization access to manage a single server? Or view details on a single server?
Yeah, it would depend on, sorry, the question is if you can have some sort of access where within a group of servers you would have, give someone delegated access to one specific node. And yes, you could do that. It'd be dependent on your infrastructure and how you're visible to the internet. But there's actually 1 or 2 examples of that being done. And if you want to sync with me after, I can share those with you as well. Yeah. Any other questions about RSMT or anything we've covered so far? Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so snapping back to where we were here, the point here is to support applications that are born in the cloud. We're not trying to bring legacy Win32 apps to Nano Server as the first tenant. It's to support a new generation of application and tool. Subset of the Win32 APIs exist. Again, CoreCLR, PaaS, .NET. And we want to have this kind of available as an OS everywhere. So you can install Nano as a host OS onto bare metal. You can install it as a guest OS on a VM. You can install it within Windows Server containers, Hyper-V containers, run it in Azure. You can run it nested. You can do whatever you want with other hypervisors. We want it to kind of be a utility more than anything else. And future editions, as far as completion go, DSC will be feature complete in the next release of Nano Server. So all the functionality that those of you that have played with it seems to be missing or not fully cooked. Kind of the similar way that we did with WMF previews. What was in previous TPs was experimental. What will be in the next TP should be more locked down. And every day we're getting more and more resources that are working with Nano out of the box. Yes?
So we run into one issue like join the domain. Will we allow it to deploy the Nano Server first and then join the domain later on, or will be the same issue, like when you need to join it when you create an image?
Yeah, the question is, right now with Nano Server, you have to join the domain before you bring it up. And the question is whether you'll be able to online domain join. In a future release of Nano Server, you will be able to do online domain joining.
Will it be like on the final version of the 2016, or will we even further?
I can't answer that question. It's going to be in an upcoming release. Okay, so dev experience. I heard some people in the front row talking about writing C# code, and I love hearing that. So let's talk about a little bit about what the developer experience is like. And before I do that, so I should really ask who's worked with PowerShell? No. How many people have written C# code in the last 12, 24 months? That half of the room. Okay. Was there a sign out front? Cool. So here's the point with being able to take what developer knowledge you have and take it to Nano Server. We don't want to redefine the developer experience around a lightweight product. We want to take the best developer experience and bring that part forward to Nano Server. So with that, apps need to remove references to what's there, what is not in Nano Server, and 32-bit references. And developers can use Visual Studio 2015 Update 1 and the Windows SDK to target Nano Server today. This functionality has been around since TP3, but it's gotten significantly better. It's gotten significantly better in the past few months. So first of all, latest version of PowerShell, Win10 or Server 2016 TP, the latest WMF. If you're using a VM, you make sure Hyper-V is installed, connect to that Nano Server machine. In Visual Studio Update 1, you do a custom install, mark those two additional options, and then this link, which I will have available, a couple of links at the end that'll get you towards all this stuff, will get you the details, the files that you need to load into Visual Studio, the V6 file, and then you run that, follow the instructions to install it, import the module, and you're good to go and start creating a Nano project. And I know people previously, prior to the TP3 timeframe, had started pulling DLLs off of their Nano Server VMs and trying to fuddle with it, but this is really a first-class dev experience now, and we look to refine it and get it to the point where it is just like developing for any other SKU of Windows. Yeah?
Does this just pertain to unmanaged code, or does it also pertain to anything .NET?
So the question is whether it pertains to unmanaged or managed code as well. It pertains to a subset of .NET because not everything is there. But the intent here is that as we go through this dev experience stuff, you would be able to explore a lot easier on your dev box what is and isn't available, as opposed to blindly targeting and finding out that the API isn't there. Okay.
So it's more of like an API check versus allowing you to target .NET Core currently, right?
as we work towards a more holistic dev experience, yeah, you'll be able to say specifically target .NET Core. The intent now is to kind of help you in exploring what it isn't and is and isn't there. And in addition to that, there's an API port tool that the .NET team runs, and that's on GitHub. You can pull it down and say, check my whatever you're working with, whatever file it is, and see whether or not this has APIs that are not CoreCLR compliant or .NET Core or ASP.NET compliant. So project templates, full IntelliSense experience, got your little error squiggles, full remote debugging experience if you download that thing that was linked and run that PowerShell script. And all the info is on the Nano Server blog. It was the last blog post from 2015 if you're looking for it. And it kind of outlines the process. And then also for this half of the room, there is like a hello world example in C# that you can run, execute on your Nano Server. And I think it's like eight or 9 steps. Should take you 5 minutes. Any questions about dev experience before we move on? Great. So reverse forwarders. Show of hands, who knows what this, okay, 10 people. So as we know, a missing DLL will result in an app failing to run even if everything else that you require is present. We needed to provide a way to run existing payloads without having to recompile for Nano Server. So this doesn't eliminate the need to refactor code. This is merely meant as a stepping stone in having a fully Nano Server compliant product. And so there's a bunch of stuff that runs with reverse forwarders today. Here's a sample of some of them. And some of those versions have incremented as we've gone on. And we're lighting up more and more. The intent here is to try and have these applications and these tools work directly on Nano without the need for reverse forwarders. Like I said, it's a stepping stone, but they are there. And so here's the colorful part. So let's talk about some improvements. I know some of you will have seen this, but let's talk about what Nano Server, what benefits there are graphically. So servicing. This is based on the full patch cycle from 2014. Has not been updated for 2015 yet, but this is kind of what it looks like between Nano Server Core and full server. Critical bulletins. You can see that the number there is significantly more for full, and number of reboots. So the point here being that, like I said at the start of this, that the intent is to work down to a point where we take all the benefits and all the great functionality that we brought when we went to Server Core with a little cost that people had to incur there to go to Nano Server, because the benefits far outweigh the costs, as you can see, just from a servicing perspective. Security. Drivers. I mean, every driver is one more that you wish you could run without. On Nano Server compared to Server Core, we've reduced that footprint by about 1/4. Services running, so this is always a great thing to do when you first spin up your Nano Server VM, is take a look at the list of services. Looks a lot better than Server Core. And open ports. For those of you security conscious folks, I know that jumps out at you right away. Going from about 27 to 12, I believe. And deployment. So setup time. What I'm going to show you at the end of this is a great way to get off the ground with Nano for those of you that haven't. Those of you that have spun up your own Nano image and injected all that stuff and spent hours and written great blogs about how people can do it easier are going to feel like you should have just waited. We now have a URL that'll get you a Nano Server VHD. No more of this fuddling around with it. So with that, setup time, under 50 seconds. Disk footprint, 1/2 gig. PhD size. So, I mean, on the way here, I realized I don't have a Nano VM with me. My box is in my car for this afternoon's lightning demos, which I recommend you all come, with all of our Nano VMs on it. But this right here took me 45 seconds. I had downloaded the VHD, threw it into Hyper-V, and it's what I'll use to show a demo here in a sec. Sorry? Yeah. Hang tight. So an installation option like Server Core here for 2016. It's not the installation option. It is something that you pull off of media. It's not listed in setup because there's additional steps that are required. It wouldn't be really logical to step through the Windows setup process, and what you really need is to configure an image that you can reuse. So as you can see on the Windows Server TP4 ISO, there's a Nano Server folder. And for drivers, for the leanest image, you just bring in what you want. So that we provide a couple of conveniences that I'll again show you in a minute, but it's as simple as just injecting your driver as you go to configure your image. And all of the drivers that you expect from Server Core are available through this Nano Server OEM drivers package. And to run as a VM, you find that guest package. So what I was talking about, this features being available as you want them, you'll notice that there is a subdirectory of packages. As we move forward, this will slightly change. It will become much more logical in that they will not be static packages available on media. I'll let you put two and two together. Right now, this is how you add packages. Again, this experience will be greatly improved, and for those of you that decide to take that VHD that I'm going to show to you today, between now and the time you start playing with that and the next release coming out, you may not have to fiddle with this too much because you might have everything you need, especially if you're running in Hyper-V. So let's talk about installation, agents, tools, other software. So no MSI support in Nano right now. Current builds require that you drop whatever you need on there or have a PowerShell script, and there is new installer technology coming. There's been some blog posts about it. Again, upcoming release of Nano Server. So you'll be able to install, uninstall, inventory, do offline and online installation support to kind of integrate it into your environment. And then this is what I was talking about deploying. So up to now, you could go and do a bunch of work. There is a tool now, the Nano Server Image Generator. You can import that, and then you are able to just kick off building the image. You can kind of just put the pieces together, run your convert Windows image, and you're good to go. Or there's a link. ak.ms/nanoeval will take you to a page that will describe the TP4 Nano Eval process. There's a EULA. You click the link, and it downloads a VHD. You put that VHD into Hyper-V, and you're good to go. I'm sure some of you could do it now, and before we're done, you'd have Nano running. So, accept it, deploys it.
Please don't all start downloading it because you'll crash the network.
Sorry?
Please don't everybody start downloading it.
Yeah. Or use your great cellular data connections. But we have this available, and if you guys want to sync with me, I actually have it available in a bunch of USB keys, so I can hook those up and you can just copy it off to speed up the process. Okay, so some functionality that's been added in the past few releases is the EMC, the Emergency Management Console. So we showed you remoting using RSMT. You know that you can remote in PowerShell, but what happens at the local console, right? What happens at the keyboard and mouse you're on locally if you're on bare metal, or when you connect on Hyper-V? So we need to provide a way, yeah?
The one thing that doesn't do in TP4 is allow you to set the DNS service. Is that changing?
The one thing that the EMC doesn't do in TP4 is DNS service.
In the build command in the image thing doesn't allow you to do that either. You can set the default gateway, you can set the IP address, you can set the subnet mask. You can't set the DNS service, which is the one thing the other thing that you really need.
Okay, I'll take a note of that after, and if you want to sync up with me, we can make sure that your feedback gets heard. I'm not sure the latest status on that. So EMC, like I was saying, is the local way to get access to your configuration settings, and now most recently network configuration and firewall settings. And with that, we can jump into a demo. A few minutes left, so here we go. Connect to this guy. So that's what it looks like. So I'm just gonna log in here. And that's what you got with EMC. So from the top, you can see you got your computer name, your work group that you're a part of, operating system, and then basic time date info, and then network addresses. I'm not connected to Hyper-V switch right now, so this one isn't network accessible. And you can see your 2 options down there. So this has actually changed since TP3 when you guys last saw it, for those of you that did. So just tab in, and then you have these 2 options, networking and firewall. And you'll also notice along the bottom the Control F6 and Control F12 for restart and shutdown. So this will list all of the network adapters. And this shows you the info you need to make sure that you're up and connected. Link status, whether you're connected or not, interface, and the driver info, so driver name, date, and version. And then notice along the bottom there, F4 to toggle the network adapter. You can disable it and enable it like that. If you do F10, you can get the routes table, configure ARP routes, add a route with F10. And then IPv4 settings. So if you want to do that, you can specify all that stuff there. And then IPv6 settings. So it's all accessible to make sure that you can get your network interface up. And then the next piece of the puzzle, firewall. So these are all the firewall rules that ship in the box. For my debugging purposes, I add a global WinRM 5985 rule. That's really easy to do. From here you can enable and disable it. I'm going to set a state toggling between enabled, no, and yes.
Is there a plan to allow you to change like the local address from the EMC? Like for example, like you could toggle them on and off, right? Firewall rules, but you can't actually alter firewall rules.
There are discussions within the Nano Server team of how to best achieve that. There are ways you can do it now using PowerShell, right? If you remote in. But from the EMC currently you can't add in TP4. Okay, and then I think that's it. Yeah, and then you can just log out with escape. And this works great on domain-connected environments as well. Within the company, I'm able to use my domain credentials and hop into a fresh Nano server. Okay. A few minutes left here. Talk about containers briefly. So before we start that, containers. Hands? Who's heard of containers? Fantastic. Who uses containers? I love it. No, I mean that's the whole point, right? We all know of this stuff, but until there's a reason or a benefit, we're not going to go and explore it. So hopefully this is a good first introduction to this stuff for people that want to go explore. Look, we want to kind of lessen this tension. It's a two-way thing. Developers want to write their apps. IT needs to maintain it. The devs don't want to have the IT folk reasonably understand and be equipped to do their jobs. And the IT folks end up thinking that the devs are just running their stuff on their machines, but not thinking about the bigger picture of deploying it to the actual production infrastructure. IT has all these policies they have to follow, all these procedures that seem archaic and bureaucratic to the developer, but they're required to run a production service, something that the developer often is not required to do. And I have a feeling that a lot of the folks in this room are in the middle of that arrow. So you guys kind of make the bridge between devs and IT. So the focus here is how do we make it so that developers can innovate and not be just kind of overloaded with all of these processes and procedures, and have it so that they can do what they need to do and IT can still have some reasonable administration over the system. And the answer to that is containers. So with containers, we have this completely new approach to building and shipping applications. We traditionally would put applications, deploy them into physical systems that we've built up with some hydration script or with a complex written manual or a bunch of PowerShell scripts, or worse, a bunch of batch scripts. But the whole point being here is that applications often require a lot of physical prep to be able to be deployed. With virtual, we're a lot more destructive, and we can pull stuff down if it doesn't work. I don't know about you guys, but my dev box ends up having 100, 150, 200 VMs on it. Not all of them running, 5% of them running, but it's not something I go and clean up often. When I run out of disk space, I'll go delete the last 20%. The issue here is that while it's still a fast deployment, a lot of those same processes that apply to IT in the bare metal space starting to apply in the virtual space. So you're having now, we thought we had tricked them, right? We thought we had gotten around it, but really what's happened is that now there's all sorts of policies and rules within organizations for how you can use VMs. So with containers, you kind of get the best of both worlds and a couple of additional benefits. You can push your app development forward, kind of get rid of a lot of the excess work in getting the infrastructure up, and mostly just consolidate a bunch of roles into one server where you were previously running individual servers for each. So here, just stepping through a couple of the principles here. Every application has its own dependencies. The virtualization happens where the container engine, this really lightweight mechanism, isolates all this stuff and packages them into these virtual containers. You have this shared host OS that kind of lays on the bottom. And then the flexibility that this gives you in the underlying OS is pretty great, because the containers are abstracting, the container support within the OS is abstracting to those specific containers what is the host OS underneath of it, the server OS underneath of it. And it's fast, right? Containers can be changed rapidly. You can scale them up, scale them down as you please. A lot of the benefits that we got going from physical to VMs happen again with VMs to containers. So this is what it looks like right now. Container operating system environments. You got Nano, highly optimized, born in the cloud applications. If it's something that has been developed, created in the past couple of years, Nano is usually the way to go. You have Server Core, highly compatible, right? All the functionality that you expect is there. I still see Server Core as what was that logical stepping stone to Nano Server, and I think we're all into Nano Server. I think you guys, if you're going to start experimenting, if you're still running full server workloads, jump on board, come join the Nano Server train. Nano Server is the future of Windows Server. It's a target for all internal cloud components and new applications. It's a new foundation for everything. It provides that just enough OS model to really mitigate the scope of what could happen to a server and the possibilities. We want that thing to be a role, an application, and really be easy to maintain. If you haven't gotten this point yet, not everything will run on Nano Server. There's going to be some work. Server Core will provide compatibility with a pretty long lead time for existing enterprise applications to start coming aboard Nano Server. And I mean, yeah, you can see the picture there, right? Let's move that way. So next steps, I'd ask all of you to kind of embrace remote management of Server Core if you haven't already. Understand that the GUI'd server is a thing of the past, my friends. Let's move on. Server Core gives you a great way to do that today. If you're running workloads in 2012 R2, great place to start. So it's the easiest transition. And make sure that things like tools and agents that only run locally, we got to explore options that are remote friendly. If you run into things that are big blockers for you, your partners, reach out to nanoserver@microsoft.com and then get playing with it. So deploy it, the guide's there, feedback is on user voice, and that VHD link again, aka.ms/nanoeval. And lastly, RSMT feedback can go onto the Windows Server user voice. If you go, there's a link for it. That's it. Thank you so much. So I'll stick around for a little bit if people want